Hello, it's Cried here, and let's talk about the most poorly designed mechanic in Diablo 4 and how to fix it. I've actually given you guys a clue with the color of the thumbnail. The mechanic is Overpower. This is a mechanic only in Diablo 4, so let me explain to you what it does first and why it is such a poor mechanic at the moment. First of all, skills you cast have a 3% chance to do overpower damage. According to the description in-game though, we know that Overpower does not apply to damage over time effects, passive abilities, and channeling skills. Furthermore, this 3% check is done only once. For example, Ice Shard launches 5 shards, but you don't check for Overpower each time. Either all of the shards overpower, or none of the hits do. More hits do not equal more chance. Another example would be Blade Dancer's aspect, which is a powerful aspect that supports Twisting Blades for rogues. As you can see here, the entire Twisting Blade overpowers, even the blade rotating around you, as it comes from the same cast. Next, this 3% chance cannot be raised. You cannot find overpower chance anywhere in skill trees, paragon boards, or gears. However, there are skills with certain conditions that guarantee an overpower when the condition is met. For example, on druids, if you stay healthy for 12 seconds, your next pulverize is a guaranteed overpower hit. We can see from the tip in the loading screen that conditions are a big focus of overpower, as the game highlights this for us. This is supposed to be a huge difference with critical hits that is dictated by your critical strike chance. Granted, we will talk about how Diablo 4 fails at this condition section for the most part later. Next, overpower damage is based on 2 things. The first is your current life plus Fortify, which we can see from the overpower damage tooltip. So, we need to talk a bit about Fortify. Fortify is a mechanic that reduces your damage taken by 10%, as long as you have more Fortify stacks than current life. Your Fortify cannot exceed your maximum life. You can actually scroll over your HP pool in-game to see how much Fortify you have, which is indicated by the extra layer of red. Once you're actually fortified, you will see the iron ring around your health orb. However, I think most people probably still don't understand the dynamic nature of Fortify. So let me give an example. Let's say you have 1000 max HP. Your skill just gave you 500 Fortify, and your current HP is at 800. Note that your Fortify is lower than your current HP, but that doesn't mean you're completely unfortified. Let's say you take 800 damage next. Normally, without Fortify, you would die. Now, you might think that Fortify doesn't do anything because you need more Fortify than current life. However, it actually applies as soon as your current life will drop below your Fortify count. Therefore, for the first 300 of the 800 damage, you are going to take the full 300 damage. But the next 500 of the 800 damage is reduced by 10%, so you only receive a total of 750 damage instead of 800, since 500 of your health is fortified. Also, Fortify is a mechanic that barbarians, druids, and necromancers have. Rogues and sorcerers don't have Fortify at all. The next part of overpower damage is based on overpower damage bonus, which has a base value of 50%. It is worth noting that, from the way the entire overpower damage is phrased, there seems to be a flat bonus component to overpower damage and a multiplicative component, as the description does say that it scales to the power of the skill itself. The definite formula is currently unknown, but I'm pretty sure you've experienced how much of a boost to damage overpower can give you throughout your gameplay. And the part about being capped to 150% bonus damage for PvP is actually from the older tooltip of Overpower. They might have removed this, which would just make PvP even worse, because just imagine a 3% chance that straight up lets you one-shot someone else. And finally, even though you can't get overpower chance, you can get overpower damage from your gear and sometimes Paragon tree. Willpower also increases overpower damage by 0.25% per point for all classes. Okay, now that we've established the basics, let's talk about the 3% chance and the attacks that guarantee overpower. For rogues, there are none at all. Neither the skill tree nor the Paragon board has anything to do with overpower. It is exactly the same for the sorcerers. Nothing at all. So we've eliminated 2 classes from Overpower builds already, even though they still have the random 3% chance to get a damage bonus. It also means that you should definitely avoid Overpower rolls on your gear if you're playing either of these 2 classes. Next, the Barbarians have a total of 1 skill that actually guarantees Overpower, and it is one of the 2 upgrades you can pick for a basic skill, Combat Bash. You have to critically strike 4 times with this basic skill in order to guarantee an Overpower with your next core skill. Honestly, quite bad, because for endgame Diablo, all classes are trying to spam their basic skills as little as possible, as they have much better ways to maintain their resource and lower cooldowns. Having to critically strike 4 times with a basic skill is a lot of opportunity cost when it comes to time. All the other things that have to do with Overpower in the Barbarian skill tree doesn't guarantee Overpowers. They simply give you boosts if you Overpower, which means that Overpower for Barbarians mainly works like it does for the Sorcerers and Rogues, by relying on the 3% base chance. Pure luck. The Paragon board also only boosts Overpower damage. Since the game already established, there will be no buffs to the Overpower rate. Next comes the Druid, which has 2 options instead of 1. Enhanced Pulverize allows a guarantee Overpower if you stay healthy for 12 seconds. And Druids also have a passive that guarantees Overpower when they are in Werebear form for over 20 seconds at rank 3. This does indeed suit the theme of being a tanky bear, but the conditions take a while to meet and can overlap. If you are in Werebear form for over 20 seconds while being healthy for the past 12, you will meet both conditions and consume both effects if you cast a Pulverize, effectively wasting one of them. Other than that, one of Pulverize's upgrade path allows you to stun enemies that are overpowered. Boulder also has something to do with Overpower, even though it doesn't guarantee you an Overpower. If you overpower the enemy with Boulder, they are stunned for 4 seconds. There's a very limited possibility outside the 3% chance to stun the enemy in its current state, because you would essentially need to remain in Werebear form for 20 seconds, and then make sure you use Boulder right after to not have to rely on the 3% chance. The Druid's Paragon board also only has damage buff to overpower damage in a few nodes. Finally, the Necromancer class is the only class that I can say has a coherent set of overpower abilities. The Blood Necro is very much tied to Overpower, as both of the core Blood Necro skills have a branch where you can choose Overpower as the bonus. Other than these effects, the Blood Key passive, Rathma's Vigor, also guarantees you an Overpower if you're healthy for over 15 seconds. This is sort of like the Druid. Overpower scales to your current HP and Fortify, so healthy as a condition makes sense. Furthermore, there is also a passive that increases overpower damage, and even further increases it when you're healthy, which adds more to the blood synergy. Blood Mist also has its CD reduced whenever you overpower. Great synergies that make sense, and the Necro not only has rare nodes for overpower, it also has a legendary node. Truly the only class that has a set of well done overpower mechanics. And one of the biggest reasons why Overpower is such a bad mechanic is because there are so few sources that guarantee Overpower. Diablo 4 clearly wants Overpower to be a very powerful effect that is dependent on the condition rather than on a chance. However, by adding the 3% chance, they're going against their original design, especially with so few sources of Overpower. This ends up making Overpower an obscure mechanic that just randomly boosts your damage by a ton 3% of the time for the vast majority of players. To add on to this, Overpower can happen on the same hit as critical damage, creating ridiculously large numbers. Now, some people that aren't using their brains are going to jump to the conclusion that you should just turn off numbers if you hate large numbers. The issue is not whether or not the numbers are big, but rather how you achieve these numbers and how comparatively larger the numbers are versus your normal damage. For PvE, Overpower not only creates clutter on your screen, but players are also not awarded for playing well, but simply getting lucky on the right attack, going against the very fundamentals of this mechanic of having to meet conditions to overpower. For PvP, it is quite needless to say that landing an overpower with your 3% RNG roll can easily one-shot a player, turning PvP gameplay even more of a mess and problematic, as if the time to kill wasn't low enough already. By the way, just as an extra side note, I honestly thought critical overpower would be green, because, well, blue plus yellow gives you green. Sorry for the digression. Anyways, back to the main topic. For those of you who still don't understand why not having the 3% chance to overpower would be better, let's use a fun metaphor. Let's say we're playing basketball with a twist. Every time someone dribbles the ball, there is a 3% chance to smite the enemy with lightning, stunning them for 10 seconds. Now this would be a perfectly fair rule, just like Overpower. Everyone has 3% chance, right? But does this necessarily make basketball a better sport to play? No, it doesn't. You're bound to dribble many times a game, but suddenly, out of nowhere, there's a 3% chance to take out one of your enemies, greatly favoring your side. Furthermore, this strong effect is just a pure 3% dice roll. This is a perfect transition to our final section of how Diablo 4 should fix Overpower. The first thing to do, if I wasn't already clear enough, is to remove the 3% chance to randomly proc Overpower, and make it so that Overpower is only guaranteed through conditions that should be more common than their current state, as we don't have many to choose from. Secondly, I personally believe that Overpower shouldn't work with critical hits, to not only prevent the maximum damage from being too absurdly high, but it also allows game designers to create a distinct playstyle that can be balanced separately. To compensate for a lack of potential critical hits, the difficulty of overpower conditions can be reduced. Classes with a more defensive choice like Fortify can choose to work their way towards overpower instead of investing into critical hits. This way, they can effectively invest more into defensive stats like health and overpower damage, instead of critical rate and critical damage, as overpower doesn't have a rate to begin with. This will truly create a differentiation of builds where overpower builds are rewarded for meeting conditions, instead of most classes simply benefiting from the random 3% chance. Please help me share this video and spread the word out on why overpower is problematic, so we can improve Diablo 4 by changing overpower for the better to create more variety in PvE and less of a balancing issue for PvP. Like and subscribe. If you want to support my work, please consider buying my fantasy novel or donating to my Patreon down below. With a book purchase, you can also request a topic from me. Krite, signing out.